Canada. This is a document that I had for years before I realized the significance of it, and it's a perfect illustration of how the internet adds to the enjoyment or the interest of our documents. So it says it's a deed and made by I, the undersigned, Jeremiah Holmes of the town of Stonington, and now it's got the appellation Sea Captain, which you don't usually see. But I thought that was interesting, and only years later, when the internet came available, I googled Jeremiah Holmes, and I got way more than I bargained for, because here's a picture of him. Look at his signature is matching the signature on the deed. I should just say the stamp here is from Lower Canada. When the deed got to Canada to be registered, they had to pay a 30 cents tax. It's a little bit confusing. Lower Canada and Upper Canada are not the way they look on a map. The references are, the terms are in reference to where they are in the St. Lawrence River. So Lower Canada is further down the river, but it's higher on the map. Anyway, this is a stamp from Quebec. And what I found about Jeremiah Holmes was that he is a full-blown war hero. Not the Civil War, but the War of 1812. And why? Because of his role in the Battle of Stonington. He put a double shot of cannon through the hull of a British ship that had come a little too close to shore. And the backstory is that he had been trained as a gunner by the British Navy when they were impressing all of our seamen. And he spent 3 years on a British man of war in which he served as a gunner.
Is your volume
It's all the way up. It's all the way up.
And that's how he became, he acquired the training that enabled him to put a hole through this ship. And the battle is famous because it was
took the video off. I know, but that means no video.
Was a failure by the British, and they wrote this almost doggerel style, one of the most popular ballads of the time, telling all about the Battle of Stonington.
See that thing?
And all thanks to Jeremiah Holmes.
Vern, you have to go mute. You are on now, so turn mute.
Okay, the next one is also Quebec. It's philatelically different because it's got the 15-cent stamp. They only had 2 stamps for amounts under and above $400 in value. And this is another spectacular backstory, because it's made by a party, Isaac Poirier, a Quebecois. What was he doing in Greenhorn, Montana territory? He was out looking for gold. And what's interesting is that Greenhorn is a place so obscure that its location cannot be pinpointed. As far as I can tell, it was an obscure little mining camp that was named for the Greenhorn Range, the Greenhorn Mountain Range. It was probably up in here somewhere. And snaking out of the Greenhorn Range is the fabled Alder Gulch, which was so solid with mining camps that they called it the 14-mile city. Kind of like suburbs in Los Angeles. You keep driving and driving and it's all one city, even though it's got 14 different names. And what was, well, that's enough for that one. I was going to say one other thing, that there is a town called Greenhorn, but it's in a different county, and it comes up on internet because it turned out that they lynched the postmaster there, who turned out to have been doing some other things besides delivering letters. And the newspaper account said, well, it didn't matter so much because he was a Democrat. So the inter-party enmity goes back to those days too. Okay, now here's next province was Ontario. They had a series of stamps that were used on documents that went to court, and the tax went for various kinds of funds not related to the court, but this went into this 10-cent stamp went into a common fund. And what happened was, it was a promissory note made in Chicago, and that's how it acquired these 45 cents of U.S. tax. But then somehow, it's not clear exactly how, but it got filed for in a court action in Canada, and it had the Ontario stamp applied. And this is the only one I've seen with this combination of, not just this specific combination, but those two countries. Now, Ontario and Quebec, also called Canada East and Canada West, and also called Lower and Upper Canada, united in the province of Canada, and they made their own stamps, bill stamps, only used on bills of exchange and promissory notes, nothing else. And they made them in 3 series. The first series here was only in use for about a year. I think they decided they wanted some more dignified stamps, and they got these American banknote engraved second issues. So now these are combinations of stamps that documents that originated in Canada, in Peterborough, Canada West, and the tax was 3 cents for every $100. So here's one for $2,000. It needs 60-cent stamps. There's 20, 40, 50, 60 cents in the first bill stamps. When it got to the U.S. says that when this was accepted for payment, and this writing here is always going vertically, is the notation, it's accepted for payment. And then once it was accepted, it would go back out into the commercial stream, because these things functioned like commercial currency. But once they knew it was good, people could endorse it back and forth. So now this one is for $3,000. It's got 90 cents. There's 50, 60, 70, 90 cents. The U.S. tax was 5 cents for every $100. So on 3,000, it was $1.50. I've only ever seen 4 combinations with these first issue stamps and 2 with the second issue. Now, they came up with this. This series here is the third issue of bill stamps. This one's interesting because it was made in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. When it got to the U.S., because it was 1872 by now, the U.S. were also going through a series of changes in their stamps, and they made second issue in blue and black, and then third issue in a variety of frame colors. And there was hardly any use for these stamps. They were only in use for about a year. And all these odd value third issues are almost impossible to find on document. I've only recorded 8 of this, so it's a great combination of Canada plus U.S. And here's another one with, this one's starting in Montreal, $900, so it would need 27 cents. There's 10, 20, 25, 28. They overpaid it by a penny. It was drawn, because it was drawn on a party in Vermont, when it was accepted here, they had to put 45 cents. And it's another fantastic combination of what I call the paper jewels. The third issue, they're so beautiful, colorful. I've never seen this combination before on any kind of document, let alone with Canada. So that's a very nice one. And this is a variation on the theme. Now the direction is reversed. Here's a document that's made in the U.S., and the U.S. stamps are put on first. But it's made payable, what does it say? See here, it says payable at the Merchants Bank of Montreal. So now when it got to Canada, the Canada tax kicked in, and then these stamps were applied. Here's another one, same direction, and here it's not obvious at first glance why there should be any Canada stamps, because it's made in Detroit. Here's this 25 cents tax on a $500 note, and there's no evident connection to Canada. But what happened is that because these things function something like commercial currency, it got endorsed to a party in Canada, and he deposited in his bank. Here's the hand stamp. This hand stamp here, I've turned it sideways. It says the Quebec Bank, St. Catharines, Ontario. And because of that, it had to have the Canadian stamps put on. And here's another one, the same thing, only now the U.S. tax is different. It's a bank check tax. Because it's payable at site, that made it, even though it's no bank is involved. Well, Duncan Sherman actually was a banker's, but because it was payable at site, it only had a 2-cent U.S. tax. And the same thing, it's a serendipitous border crossing. There was, it was endorsed en route for deposit at the Bank of Montreal, and you can see up here Montreal, Bank of Montreal. They had the same sort of facet to their taxation, that the tax would apply on things that were coming in as well as going out. And now here's another, the last Canada, Nova Scotia had their own stamps, distinct in that they had an overprint, NS, on the Canada bill stamps. So here's a draft that was made in Liverpool, Nova Scotia, 1869, but it's drawn on a party in Bangor, Maine. So it had the 3-cent Nova Scotia at its execution, and then upon acceptance it had 5 cents U.S. I've only ever seen 2 in-period combinations of this Nova Scotia. Why did they need this overprint? It's not clear at all. The statute said that the stamps had to have an NS overprint, and this only lasted for about 2 years because originally there was a difference in currency between the value of the currency in Nova Scotia and the rest of the province of Canada. And so, okay, they got the currencies unified, and here's an example of these are actually the same parties as the one I showed earlier in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. And you'll notice that even though the Nova Scotia stamps weren't required anymore, they were using them up, being thrifty. And that 50-cent stamp there has the Nova Scotia overprint. So it's a rare combination, but it's out of period when it was required. And here's another example of that 70-cent third issue U.S. Not too surprising because it was the same party that used it before on the other document. And all this launched me into a investigation. What was the purpose of this Nova Scotia overprint? And in the literature they claimed it was currency control. That because the Nova Scotia 75 cents was equal to Canada 73 cents. And they thought people were going to be going and buying their stamps in Nova Scotia a little bit cheaper and taking them back to Canada and saving that 2 cents and defrauding the government. And it turned out that's baloney. The cost of doing this was way more than the possible profit. And the other problem is the Nova Scotia currency was only what they call a currency of accounts. They didn't have Nova Scotia money like this. They actually used British coins up there, and the only Nova Scotia coins were a half penny and a penny to make up odd amounts. So anyway, that's kind of a sidebar, so I'll skip any more past that. And now we're proceeding to the second country, which is Cuba plus U.S. This is a bill of exchange. The stamp is not adhesive, it's a printed giro, means exchange. And it tells the values here from 22,501 escudos and above. And this was way above. This was $25,000 of gold, which is 22,500 escudos was 11,700. So it was the high value and it was drawn on this banker Charles Luling and Company in New York. So when it got to New York, they had, here it's actually hand stamped, accepted for payment. On the 25,000, they had to pay $12.50 U.S. tax, and then it went back out into this river, into the stream, and it would be passed from hand to hand. And it's got this nice hand stamped gold, had to be paid in gold. At the time, there was a premium, a gold premium against currency. Now, what struck me strange about this is there's numbers of other bills of exchange, and here involving all the same parties, Whitman and Company, drawn on Luling, and there's no Cuba stamp. So it's kind of puzzling to me why. There was a war going on there at the time, so that might have had some involvement. And I wanted to make one more side comment about the internet and what you learn. That Luling, Charles Luling, if you Google him, there's a town called Luling, Texas. The toughest town in Texas. Why? Because it was wild and rowdy. It was the terminus of a railroad, the Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio Railway. It was named for Luling because he helped fund this railroad. So the town named for this staid and dignified benefactor turned out to be the rowdiest town in Texas. And I say, who says the universe lacks a sense of humor? But back to Cuba. Here's the only other ones that I've seen in this period with stamps of the U.S., and this is the Giro adhesive of Cuba. And I found two of these from it was a seller in, I think, Spain. It was somewhere overseas. These are interesting because at the time, the U.S. tax was for a brief period, the U.S. tax depended not only on the amount of the transaction, but on the time till payment for about a year. And I've only ever seen a handful of U.S. incoming bills from that period. This is one where it was $2,160. Well, the tax was 2 cents for every $100. So there's 11 $200 units times 2 cents is 22 cents, and there it is. And here the Giro stamp on the back. And here's another one from that same archive. $1,600. It needed 24 cents. There's, I'm sorry, $0.16. Oh yeah, okay, this is 16, yeah, 16, that's 8 $200 units, so it's 16 cents, and there's the 16 cents. And there's the Giro stamp is on the front. And as far as I could tell, the reason those stamps were on there was because this was a long-running legal or court battle where here they're naming all the bills of exchange by number that are involved, trying to get their money back. And they probably put those stamps on to ensure legality in the court proceedings. And it's comforting to me that the amounts that the stamps are for exactly matches the amounts of the bills. So I doubt that there's any philatelic fakery involved. The next one is the last one I've seen of Cuba. This is so interesting because here the Giro stamp was put on first in Havana. Then when it got drawn on, was drawn on a party in New York, and when it got there they put a 2-cent stamp on, which you wouldn't think belongs, especially since it's got a circular punch, but it doesn't go through the stamp. What is going on? And you look on the back and you see it was a hanging chad. That punch went through, was meant to go through the stamp and tie it to the document, but it didn't go all the way through. So Shades of Florida, 2000. And the other thing that's somewhat serendipitous about this is that really they didn't need to. By this time, this is 1877, the only U.S. tax left was bank check. And this wasn't a bank check. So it didn't need that 2-cent stamp, but for sure. It's tied, it belongs, and it's probably the most exotic recorded use of that 2-cent Liberty stamp. And number 3, U.S. plus Denmark. This is a short topic because I've only ever seen 2 of these. It's a power of attorney made in the U.S. in New York by an immigrant, evidently, or a person from Copenhagen, and it's giving the power of attorney to oversee his estate back in Denmark. So first it got the U.S. stamp, then it went to the U.S. consulate so that they see all the bona fides, that when it gets to Copenhagen they see, yeah, this is for real, this signature is correct and all of that. And it had the Danish tax put on them for their power of attorney tax. 1 rigsdaler. Number 4, U.S. plus France. This is a bill of lading for a shipment of refined petroleum going from New York to Havre, which is the port for Paris. 600 barrels of refined petroleum. Here's the U.S. bill of lading. Bill of lading tax was only for foreign ports, not domestic. But so this is going to France. It needed the 10-cent bill of lading tax. And lo and behold, when they got to France, it had their stamp put on. You hardly ever see this. The bills of exchange were, the bills of lading were made in sets. You see, the master hath affirmed to 4 bills of lading, all of this tenor and date, one of which being accomplished, the others to stand void. So usually the bills of lading that have survived are the ones that sat back in the drawer in New York in case something went wrong. But this one actually was sent to France. You needed to have the bill of lading in your hand before you could take the shipment. So this is one of the few that made it there and got a stamp and survived. The rest of the usual France combination is on bills of exchange. It's the same story as the ones in Canada, where the bill would be stamped in the U.S. and then get to France and have a French tax paid. And I want to say a little something about the bills of exchange. They were also made in sets. You see here first, and it says here, pay this our first of exchange, second and third of the same tenor and date unpaid. So these were all made in sets of 3. The first would be mailed. The second sometimes was mailed. The third was almost always held in reserve. And a lot of times the second was also held in reserve. So the firsts are the interesting ones. They're the ones that traveled, and they got all the markings. The markings of those whose hands it passed through. And here, paid in August 1868. Made in July. And now, oh, that was just to show bills of exchange. Now here's one that's got, starting in New York, drawn on a party in Havre, a nice array of markings. Here's the U.S. tax. It was 2 cents for every $100, 48 cents U.S. And here's the French stamp that was put on as it was coming in. And here it's blown up because it's kind of hard to see. But it has effects coming, or I mean bills coming from d'étranger, means from foreign, or from the French colonies. And here's the amount here is written around here. And this was their 1860 issue of stamps. And look, now here's the other one that I showed before. In 1864, they made a new series of stamps a little easier to visualize. So here's the U.S., because this was less than $100, it only needed 2 cents U.S. tax. And it got to France, it had their 1864 issue, 20 centimes. Okay. Here's one that I don't own, but it shows the taxes a little bit better because the amounts are larger. Now you see the U.S. tax was 96 cents, and here's the French tax. 13 francs. About a dozen of these August Belmont bills, I should say back, let me go back. You see what it says here, AB and Company, that's August Belmont and Company. Why his name endures. Politically, he did a lot of stuff. He restored the Rothschild banking interest in the U.S. He was the Consul General of the Austrian Empire and a Minister of Affairs at U.S. Embassy in the Netherlands. He was also the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, which caused this lampooning of him for about a dozen years. For none of this is he remembered today. Why? He's remembered because the Belmont Stakes is named after him. And guys who follow horse racing, which is most guys, know that that's the third jewel of the Triple Crown. The Belmont Park Racetrack and Belmont Stakes is named after him. Okay, here's another twist to the tale. The bills that I showed previously are commercial bills. They're companies settling their accounts, and they're usually in large amounts. This is something different. This is a bill, what I call a remittance bill, where these are sold to immigrants who want to send usually small amounts of money back home. So this Bank of New Orleans was catering to the French-speaking or the French immigrant community in New Orleans. And you see it's to Mrs. So-and-so, only exactly 100 francs. So what would happen is that because they couldn't easily send money, they would go and buy this bill of exchange at the Bank of New Orleans and pay like a 3% premium, and then they would mail the bill back home, and this is his wife or someone in his family could take it to their bank and get the money. So this is because this is only made in duplicate and payable at sight. The tax was 2 cents U.S. and when it got to France, it had the French stamp put on. And this one is drawn on so-and-so in Bordeaux. And the next slide is showing another one from the same bank, but now it's drawn on a party in Draguignan. And the same thing, it's 150 francs. So this is another example of these remittance bills, as opposed to a commercial bill. This is interesting also in a couple of ways. You see how the style is similar. The Bank of New Orleans was replaced by the New Orleans National Banking Association. Same bank, they just reorganized, changed their name. And why it's got this beautiful array of markings, but it's interesting also that it's got two of these old stamps on here, the 1860 issue that we saw before, that had long since been replaced. And it's also interesting that, okay, it's for 500 francs, 500 francs, and this bill says 400 to 500 francs. So why did they need two of them? One should seem to be enough, but what happened is, in the interim, they had doubled the tax. So by now, the tax, it could have been paid with there was new stamps with all the correct changes made, but they went back and used two of these old stamps to pay the tax. So I thought that was cool. Here's one that I just scooped off the internet. It's also U.S. France, but for stock transfer. And I bought it because it's got the matching certificate stamp. It's from 1863. It's an early use when they were trying to use the matching stamps. A certificate of stock had to have a certificate stamp. Well, not strictly speaking, because they had taken away the requirement, but people were still using up the stamps that they had bought in anticipation of needing the matching ones. But so now I see this. There was this strange hand stamp on here, and when I look closer, I see this is actually a stamp tax. It says signe vise pour timbre in Paris, 9 francs and 36 centimes. And it turned out that this was a hand stamp that they had used originally. It's like a precursor to the adhesives, and it was sometimes used even after the adhesives were created. And what was it all about? It was a stock transfer, because here this party, Mr. Givelet is the one that owned the stock. And down at the bottom, they always have this panel for stock transfer, that I hereby sell the shares to so-and-so, and it's got the signature. It doesn't have a name in place, but it turned out if you look on the back, all this is telling the bona fides that here first you have a statement of the mayor of the 8th arrondissement of Paris saying that yes, this signature on the front is good, because they don't want to just send it back. They have to prove to the company, yes, this is a legit transaction. So after it passed from the mayor, it goes to the vice consul of the U.S. It says, yes, the mayor's signature is okay. So lots of interesting detail. And so when you figure out what tax was being paid, this 9.36 francs, just making a rough estimate, the shares were worth $50. So 3 shares was 150. And I used my conversion factor, that's about 714 francs, and 9 francs was about 1.3% of the value, which seems kind of high, but it all turned out to be correct, because France in fact had a 1.2% tax, and here's an example of it on a later bond where it says foreign, basically this is stocks and bonds. By the law of 1872, it is 1 2/10%. So that matches what I had already figured out, just with I used a little bit wrong conversion factor from dollars to francs. So now number 5 is Germany, which at the time wasn't, well, I guess this one, by now it really was Germany and not just a collection of states, but this is Brunswick. Was it a duchy or a state? But anyway, this is another it's a power of attorney made by 2 sisters in Brunswick for sale of stock that they had back in the right here it says the Louisiana State Bank of New Orleans. And so in Brunswick, it has this stamp 2.5 groschen, and because it was a notary involved, and here's his hand stamp, it's a notarial fee, 2.5 groschen. Then when it got to the U.S., it needed that 25 cents stock transfer tax. Sole recorded U.S. Brunswick combination. Now, here's some more of what I'm calling the Remittance Bills. Before it was for the French community in New Orleans. This is for the German-speaking community in Cincinnati. This operation, the European Exchange Office of CFED, was catering to this community, and you can see it's another round amount, 50 Prussian thalers, 50 Thaler. Prussian current. So it's another case where it's pretty clear that it's a German immigrant is sending money back home. Here's the 2 cent U.S., and when it got to Prussia, it had their 5 silver groschen added. Here's another one to the German community, but now this one is originating in Boston. 2 cents U.S. and the Prussian stamp is on the back when it was accepted. And if you notice that they changed the stamps a little bit. Here there was the background is black on this stamp, and here it's gray. I'm not sure exactly why they did that, but they're now here a little bit later we have the German Empire. these are all stamps from the German Empire. And it's the same kind of deal, but what's great about these is that they're all from the period when these rare, on document, odd value U.S. second and third issue stamps are being used. And most of these are coming from J. Cook and Company in either Philadelphia or New York. And the tax was 2 cents for every $100. Now this was, well, the currency is in florins, so you have to know how to convert it. But it turns out to be correct, 18 cents U.S. And then when it gets to Germany, it has all this array of stamps put on. Here the 10 cent is nothing special, but the 4 cent, you hardly ever see that on a document. There was never any. This is practically the only kind, because this was 2 cents for every $100. You could have something like 4 cents being used. Here's one that's got the U.S. 60 cent, which is another big rarity on document, and in combination with and this is J. Cook and Company in New York. And these are all firsts of exchange, which is just what you'd expect, because that's the one that would arrive first and get all the markings, be accepted and paid. But and here's another one. Now we have U.S. third issue. What happened is that the second issues were all blue and black, and users were complaining, well, it's hard to tell these stamps apart. So can you do something about that? And instead they changed the colors of the stamps. Oops. They changed about half of the colors, and they changed, see, the 4 cent was changed from blue to brown, and the 60 cent was also changed from blue now to orange. And these colors, the new colors, were the ones that they had been using back in the first issues. The 60 cent inland exchange had been orange. And this third issue, 4 cent, recorded on only 9 documents, and 60 cent on only 10. And forget the fact that now they're used in combination with Germany. And now here's,
interrupting. You have 15 minutes left if you want to do some question and answer.
Okay, it's getting toward the end. This is so interesting because here, this is the first bill, but it's attached by a little spot of glue to the second. The first and second were handled as if they were one. And the stamps were, because it was more convenient, the stamps were put on the second bill. And the first, it says, only for acceptance. And the payment went onto the second. And this is a case where the first and second were both mailed, and one caught up with the other, and they counted them, they treated them like one. And here's another example where they're not glued together. These are a first and the second from the same batch, the same set, all treated the same stamps, sent to the same place, and again, the first one says only for acceptance, and the second is the one that got the stamps. And here it's the third issue that's the rare one for the U.S. on document. It's a little more common than the 60 cent, but still cool. Here's one where this is a city bond that the inland exchange tax was paid here in 1870 in San Francisco, and 17 years later it was sold. I guess this bond was still paying and was still considered a good investment. And here's this German tax that says 2 per thousand, which is 0.2%, which was on their which is the stock and bond transfer tax. Not the only combination like that I've ever seen. U.S. plus Great Britain, the ill-fated George Cairns. I bought this. Why? Because look at it, how beautiful it is with all these stamps. And a long time later, I realized I have several of these certificates like this. It's a certificate of shipment. Insurance company is saying, yeah, we certify that such and such was shipped. But only this one has stamps on it. And why did that happen? And it turns out it's because there was a claim. It says here, due so-and-so, 403 pounds, which is the equivalent of this $2,000 U.S. Why were they paying the claim? What happened to that ship? And you go to the internet and you find out the ship sank. The George Cairns, 729 tons, had foundered off the coast of Nova Scotia the same day it left Montreal. A total loss with 8 lives lost. That's why the Great Britain insurance stamps are on there, because the claim had to be paid. U.S. plus Great Britain foreign exchange. This is the same kind of thing we've seen before, but now it's going to England. They have these foreign bill stamps that you see quite a bit off document. These are only used incoming, not going out. And this is, okay, coming from New York. Here's the U.S. on acceptance, the foreign bill. Here's another one of Bowles Brothers, 6 cents U.S. They have a new series of stamps now over there. Before, they had these big foreign bill stamps. Now they made a new series in 1871, smaller. Let's skip over this. This one is cool. It's cool because it's got the combination of, here's the first, the 1857 or 1854 series, and here's the 1871 series used together. And the U.S. stamps are also interesting because even though they're both blue and black, you see the difference in shades. To the printer, blue was blue, but for collectors, we like it because the shades are different. Here's another one now coming from St. Louis. I'll skip over this one a little bit. This is called Sole Bill of Exchange from Chicago. This is another remittance bill for 10 pounds sterling sent back to the family. Here's one where the U.S. stamp, because they didn't want to be bothered with adhesives, they'll just put on, they had a printed stamp that they used, and there's the Great Britain. In England, when they were going the other direction, here's one from Halifax, not Nova Scotia, but Halifax, England. They use an embossed stamp, not the adhesive. So that was put on first. And this one says foreign bills in sets. And the next one's showing, now this one says bill or note. What happened was they changed their tax. In 1854, the rate was for the set of 3. In 1870, the first bill will show the full tax. So it's nice that these two are showing the two. This is a receipt. This is U.S. plus Haiti. The U.S. bill of exchange. And when it got to Haiti, it had this stamp tax put on where they were saying, we're not going to pay this bill of exchange. Here's one where the U.S. plus Netherlands. This is so interesting because this stamp says 1/5 betaald, 1/5 paid. What happened was this tax was put on, and the stamp, it was applying to stocks and bonds, and they let you grandfather it in. If you would pay 1/5 of the tax, they gave you a few months to do this. You could pay 1/5 of the tax, and your old bond would be okay. And that was for for 6 months. And then the next 3 months, they had a stamp that said 1/2 paid, and after that, you had to pay the full tax. So there's a couple of those. Oh, there's a story to that, but I'll skip this. I'll skip that. The last country is New Zealand. This one is so interesting because it's got stamps of 3 countries. Only seen this twice. And here's the New Zealand embossed stamp on execution. It passed through, got endorsed in England, and it had to have a British incoming, and finally the U.S. tax was put on. And this is originated by the master of a whaling vessel that was from New Bedford, Massachusetts, but was out there whaling in New Zealand. Here's another one where the New Zealand stamp is embossed, but it was not the right amount. And so someone noticed it and then put the New Zealand adhesive on. So it's a rare combination of that. Usually would never see that. The embossed would normally pay the whole thing. And I think the last one is showing the U.S. rare 60-cent stamp on one of these New Zealand bills. Here's the New Zealand embossed here. The end.